And joining us now in studio, Omar Ha-Redeye, a lawyer and a principal at Fleet Street Law. Nice to have you here, Omar.
My pleasure.
Okay, why are you supporting the Occupy Toronto folks?
Well, I think it's not so much a support of their principles or their goals, but it's rather a support that our society can allow this type of expression in opposition to the type of practices that we see in our world today.
So you're happy to convey upon them all the free speech rights they're entitled to, but does it go beyond that?
Certainly. I think, there's talk about evicting them, forcibly moving them from the premises and things like that. I think that would be the wrong move for our politicians to make. I also think that if there is incidents where there potentially are clashes with police officers, I think at that point we definitely would be getting involved from a legal capacity to try to assist these individuals as best we can.
So you will go to bat for them if that were to take place?
As much as possible, certainly.
It's happening in the States now. I don't know if you've seen, but Oakland, Portland, I think, it's gotten testy. And
it has.
It's getting a little messy there. What do you, part of the issue here, I guess, is that obviously this is fairly organic, and the folks don't necessarily speak with one voice. So what do you understand their goals to be?
If we can speak about very broad goals, I think it's, number one, to generally raise awareness about the issues. And the issues, as you've indicated, are very broad and diverse. It's also to express solidarity with the other Occupy movements across, well, the Western Hemisphere and also across the world, if you want to tie it into the Arab Spring.
Solidarity to what end?
Solidarity in the sense that, in Canada, and I think that's one of my qualifiers, Canada, we have it pretty good. We really do. It's not as bad as it is, for example, in terms of economic disparities as it is in the United States. But we should be concerned about what's going on in the United States and in other parts of the world because it affects us in Canada, as we're seeing through the economic recession.
Yeah, but in the States, they are demonstrating in the United States about the banks and about how money has completely taken over politics. Mm-hmm. And here, we didn't have any banks bailed out,
no.
And we have extremely strict limitations on how much you can contribute to political parties. So that two of the main things that have occupied, if you like, the mindset of the United States don't even exist here, and yet it's happening here. Does it make sense?
It makes sense to me because we live in an era of globalization. So even though the banks in the US were the ones that primarily had the problems, and Canada ended up faring quite well, we did feel the effects of it. It's a global recession. It's a global financial crisis, largely due to the actions of a small number of people situated in Wall Street.
And K Street and Washington, the Pennsylvania Avenue and so on.
Certainly.
Okay, so why aren't they going down there? If that's where the decisions were made and that's where the action was, what are they occupying St. James Park in downtown Toronto for?
Well, it's probably easier to make it to St. James Park than it is to get all the way down to Washington, D.C. And I think there's also the realization that we want to mobilize and send a message to our politicians right here in Canada, right here in Toronto, that things that are going on across the other side of the world or on the other side of the border are things that we should be paying attention to. And I don't think our politicians have been doing that either.
Can you tell whether this has caught on with Mr. and Mrs. Everyday Ontario yet?
It's really tough to tell. I think increasingly we're going to see that happen when people feel the financial crisis, when they feel the pinch, when they feel the fact that they're not going to have a pension, as we heard in your previous panel, or their pension might be affected. I think people are starting to pay attention to the fact that there's something wrong in our society, and the Occupy movement is just one of those symptoms of what's wrong.
Mayor Ford here in Toronto has said, it's time to move on. Point made, time to go home. You're occupying a public park. The people who would like to use that park can't use that park, they say, because all of the tents have been pitched and the protesters are occupying it. What do you think of that?
I don't think that's Mayor Ford's decision to make. If he does make that decision, if he decides to take action to forcibly evict the protesters, I think that's the wrong decision to make, and it could make this situation worse. It could escalate, and I don't think anybody wants to see the situation escalated.
So how long should the people who are protesting be entitled to stay there?
It's not about entitlement. I think the problem that we're facing is a long-term problem. Let them stay. I'm even willing to go out. I've gone down there and given out sandwiches. Let's give them support. Let's provide them medical care and attention and all the type of support that we can as a community. And if they stay there indefinitely, so be it.
If they stay there indefinitely, so be it?
That's my position.
Really?
Unless
it's pretty cold in the winter down there.
It is pretty cold in the winter, so let's provide them some blankets. Let's give them better shelter, better insulation in their tents. I think and again, this is not about something that the government should necessarily be doing, but people like me in the community and other peoples in the community, we can assist them in that way. And I think that's a social responsibility that we have.
Okay, you think they still provide a valuable societal function by continuing to occupy the park?
I think if they make it through the winter, they really make a very strong point. I think that's incredible if they can do it, and I wish them all the best.
They make an incredibly strong point of what?
About their resilience and about the nature of the problems that we're facing.
Okay, so if they manage to get through an entire winter without, and you know, it's going to be brutally cold down there. We don't have to, you know, anybody who lives in Toronto knows it's pretty close to the water and it gets very cold down there. What they've proved is they've got good outdoor survival skills, but have they proved anything more beyond that?
Well, that's up to politicians, like for example, Mayor Ford, to actually realize that these individuals are not going away, and more importantly, the problems are not going away. So the change is going to have to come, unfortunately, from the politicians, and we know politicians are very, very difficult to change their mind.
Okay, you say the change. What's the change?
Well, we heard about the change, right, and the change with Obama's election and how much really got changed. So I believe in incremental change. I think incremental change is far more effective, and I think if we start to see some incremental change coming from the top, from our politicians.
Like what?
Well, let's have a dialogue, and I think when you start to have a mayor saying, the point has been made, I think the dialogue's being cut off. The mayor's saying, well, there's nothing more to be said here, and I'm not going to sit down and talk to you guys, and I actually don't care about what you have to say. That's the way I interpret that statement. And I think we need to actually start to have dialogue with these individuals, not just in St. James Park, but this is across Canada and across the world. So
have the dialogue, and the Occupy folks come to City Hall and they sit in Mayor Ford's office and they say, here's what we want done. What are they saying? What do they want done?
Well, I think you can probably assume that the majority of the people in Occupy Toronto are not supporters of Mayor Ford for a number of different reasons. They tend to be part of what the clip that you showed, the ideological left. And Mayor Ford is not in that side of the political spectrum by any means. So I think it's going to be a very difficult dialogue to have, especially with someone who does not share your views. But this is part of leadership, and that's what a mayor is. It's part of leadership. You have to make compromises.
I know, I hear you, but I guess the point I'm getting to is Occupy Wall Street, which was the original. The clips I've seen of people in Occupy Wall Street, as well-intentioned as I'm sure they are, seem to want 100 different things. There's no unified single message coming out of there. There's 100 different things coming out of there. So you say, okay, keep the dialogue going. It's up to the politicians to meet with these folks and, you know, and pursue the change that they want. How do you do that when they want 100 different things?
Every time an election runs around and people have town halls, the issues tend to be just as diverse. And I would say if there was a forum, have a conversation back and forth. It's not going to be a short conversation. And when you have that many issues, yes, it's going to be a very, very long conversation. But that's part of political leadership, and I think that's where we need people to, on the political side, to step up to the plate.
Do they believe in capitalism?
Some of them do, some of them don't.
Well, this is what I mean. I mean, who do you listen to? You listen to the ones who do, you listen to the ones who don't.
You listen to them all. It doesn't necessarily mean that you follow what they say, right? And that's what a dialogue is.
Okay, in the Occupy Toronto situation, the Occupy group has set up in a park adjacent to St. James Church. The mayor has said, we want them out of the public park. The church has said, we have some of that land, and they can stay on our land as long as they want. Legally speaking, is that right?
Well, I haven't seen the title to the park, but my understanding is that it's a joint ownership. So
joint between whom and whom?
The church and the city.
Ah.
And that's my understanding. Again, I haven't seen the title. And if that's the case, if the city says, we want you out, then legally they have a right to do so. How would they affect that? Well, it's going to be through law enforcement and probably using force. And I don't want to see that. And I don't think anybody in the Occupy movement wants to see that. And I really think nobody in the public wants to see that as well. So again, it's a very bad political move.
How much of this do you think are kind of folks from the 60s who are very nostalgic about what the possibility of protest can bring, and they want to do that in this generation as well?
There's probably an element of that, but to be honest with you, I wasn't even alive in the 60s, okay? But I look at it with a lot of nostalgia as well, because what were they protesting for in the 60s? They were protesting for civil rights, for equality, for the end of segregation, and they actually achieved a lot of those goals. I think that's pretty inspiring.
Well, they were protesting the end of the Vietnam War as well. And
there's that as well,
okay, so now we've mentioned 3 or 4 concrete things that those demonstrations were designed to deal with.
Yes.
I'm not sure you can say that about, I'm not sure, I don't know, but I'm not sure you can say that about these Occupy movements. Here are the 1, 2, 3 things we want to have happen. That's, I think, what some, you know, if there's a vast middle class out there that may not be as hip to this thing as you want them to be, that may be part of the problem, do you think?
It could be part of the problem, but I'll also remind myself, in terms of what I've read through history, that it took years for the Vietnam protests to actually start to get effective and build momentum. It started out very, very small. And so these protests and this movement might actually take a few years to actually start to develop what the primary issues are as well. But we know, I mean, simply by looking at what the various grievances are, yes, there is an anti-war component to this as well.
Anti-war?
Certainly.
Which war?
Well, we have Canadian troops in Afghanistan.
I don't think we have Canadian troops anywhere anymore.
Well, I mean, they're still there as advisors and training.
Not fighting. We have no combat. We have no troops, I think, anywhere in the world right now fighting wars.
Not formally, but there are also programs with Canada and the US and other G8 nations where we actually do troop exchanges. So there are operations that occur. We've had Canadian troops in Iraq, not in a formal capacity, but operating under American command. So when we speak about anti-war, it might also mean that, you know what, when we speak to our allies, and they're allies for good reasons, we have to take a harder line and say no. When we are going to go and invade a sovereign nation, there has to be more justification than what we've done. We can look at Libya, and I'm no supporter of Gaddafi, but it started out as this right to intervene and protect civilians, and it turned into regime change overnight. And I think that undermines our credibility as well when we go to the world stage and we say, look, we want to actually assist people and we want to help people around the world, and all of a sudden we're now accessing the wealth and the resources that they have in those nations.
Okay. Omar, thanks for coming in tonight and sharing your views on this.
It was a pleasure.
Omar Ha-Redeye, principal at Fleet Street Law.